Hello everybody, hope you're okay. Now the Adidas Adizero SL2 here, it's hard to think of a shoe that's changed so much from one version to the other, and I think in this case much for the better. The original SL here was a very firm shoe, and although it was reasonably light, as in SL, as in super light, it was rather a hard work shoe to run in, whereas this new SL2 is perhaps the softest shoe that I've tried this year, and certainly the softest shoe that I can recall trying from Adidas. So let's have a look at this one and see how it compares to some of the other Adidas Adizero shoes on the market at the moment. So I've noticed of late it's sort of customary to give a long disclaimer at the front of videos. Suffice to say, this is a shoe that I bought with my own money. It's retailing at £110 on the Adidas UK site. I managed to pick it up with a 10% discount from Sports Shoes, so it came in at £99. It was quite pleasing these days to pick up a shoe for under £100. Makes Sue happier. Well, she doesn't really happy about I get more shoes in, but at least I can tell her that I didn't spend a small fortune on an old brick again. So this is no brick for sure. I have to admit, I haven't done a huge amount of running in this shoe, just 2 runs so far, but hopefully there's enough to give you a bit of my initial thoughts and help you to decide whether this is a shoe you want to pick up or not. So on the face of it, the original SL and the SL2 are very similar. Both feature a combination of Lightstrike and Lightstrike Pro. Lightstrike Pro being Adidas's premium foam that they feature in their expensive races like the Adios Pro 3 and their sort of ultra sort of like concept shoe, the Prime X2 Strung, costing considerably more money. But the problem was that in the SL that it had a very small sliver of Lightstrike Pro just about there that I don't think I could really ever feel it. And also the big problem is that it was the original Lightstrike, which really was, I have to say, was basically a brick. And trying to sort of press it in there, it's just not moving at all. The shoe's just not flexing at all. I mean, basically, I thought it was just like hard work. I mean, I have seen some comments on other channels that, yeah, it was a good shoe, needed breaking in, etc., what you're talking about. But in these reviews, you have to give your honest opinion of a shoe, and ultimately, I have to tell you whether I like it or not. I can sort of guess whether shoes would be liked by other people, but ultimately, I can't tell how a shoe is for you on your feet. Now, the SL2 is also basically a combination of Lightstrike and Lightstrike Pro, but the combination is much more even. You've got this Lightstrike Pro layer at the top, and you can even see a little cutaway to even show you it. But also, more importantly, I think to a certain extent, that the Lightstrike here must be the Lightstrike 2 foam, and it seems even softer than what has been seen in the Adios 8 and the Boston 12. But it's still responsively soft. It's not like ridiculously soft like, say, an Invincible, but for Adidas I think it's certainly a very soft shoe in general terms. So when you put it on and just do your initial runs and even just walking down the road, you can really feel this Lightstrike Pro layer at the front, and it just feels like a nice sort of like squidgy soft feeling that you get a nice rebound off the road. What I'd also say about it, it's an incredibly neutral shoe. It's actually got a glued in insole, whereas the original one was actually removable, and also it's got very little arch support, so it's a classic neutral trainer, and perhaps then some. I think to a certain extent, if you're looking for a shoe with a bit more stability, I think I would probably reach for the Boston 12, just a bit more to it, from Adidas that is. The weights in this one for me is coming in at 302 grams on the left, 305 on the right, so that's say just over 300. That's a bit less than in the original SL, which was 320. Adidas are listing in the standard UK 8.5 shoe that this is 238 grams with a 36mm at the back and 27 at the front for a 9mm offset. That compares to 35.25 in the original SL, which was then notionally a 10mm drop. On the face of it, you would say that the stack height is actually increased in the SL2, but I think the fact that the foams are quite soft actually feels to me that the SL original one feels like a higher stack just because the foam doesn't compress as much. So it's interesting, I thought, to see how those figures sometimes you have to take with a pinch of salt, and actually you have to sort of really put them on field. I think it's a bit like that with the Alpha Fly. They was all saying it was like a 4mm drop, but when you put it on, it seems to compress so much that it just felt like a normal drop, and it wasn't like a 4mm drop or a 5mm drop you feel in a Hoka, that sort of thing. So yeah, buyer beware there in terms of these drop figures. I think you really need to try them on. But for an Adidas shoe, I do like that sort of 8 to 10mm range. When it gets down to sort of 4 or 5s, I start to feel that's a bit too low for me. Again, that's just a personal preference. Some people may like the lower drops, some people may not. We're all different, aren't we? In terms of the tongue, well, Aubrey will be disappointed to find out that it doesn't have a gusseted tongue, so maybe that will be dismissed straight away. But it does have in here sort of like the sort of like lace keepers. So effectively it sort of becomes a bit like a gusseted tongue, because when you move it, the whole thing moves. So it does effectively mean it's all, for all intents and purposes, it serves the same general purpose. It's got a nice little bit of padding there, I would say. The laces are sort of the classic ones that you would have got from Woolies back in the day. Adidas clearly don't have a good supplier of high-tech laces, because they seem to put these ones in every shoe. But I mean, it does a turn. I think the problem with these ones is that when you really cinch them down, they don't really have that springy response that you expect. So you have to sort of work at them a bit. But I think on the plus side, these basic laces, they do tend to stay put. And I always tend to now put a double knot in my shoes. So if they do come loose, it's more my fault than the shoe's fault. In terms of the overall comfort, there's quite a lot of padding at the back for a sort of like a lightweight daily trainer. I did find on the side here that it was a bit high, so when I was going along, not going quite a straight line, I did feel a slight bit of discomfort on my ankle bone, so slightly be aware there. Maybe it's the fact I just got to tighten them up too much, but yeah, I was just a bit cautious of that. It does have the ability to do the double knot if you're interested in that one, although I would say that out of the box, the laces were quite short, so although there's a bit more length to them now because I pulled in the laces a little bit, I think if you've got a more average to wide foot, you'll be struggling. And in fact, I think to a certain extent, if you've got a wide foot, I'd perhaps stay clear of this one. I mean, the comparison is if you've got the Boston 12 and you feel that sort of on the narrow side, then I would certainly not bother with this. I think you would find it too narrow. I've had rumours that they are going to bring out a wide version of this. So if you are finding the Boston 12 not really to your liking in terms of width, then yeah, maybe hold out for the wide version of this one. In terms of the outsole, being more on the budget range, it doesn't have the Continental rubber, but I think this stuff is plenty good enough. This little hole here is perhaps good for feeling a bit more liveliness to it, and that's amazing how that much comes in. Just emphasises how soft and lively this shoe is. But also it's a bit of a magnet for attracting things. I also got a bit of dog shit in here, so I've had to get out a few flash wipes to clean it up for your perusal tonight. And these ones are not too bad. I mean, I was obviously saving a bit of weight here, but again, the Adidas's outsoles are usually quite good, and not really having any concerns here. And the fact that it's not too much rubber, that means obviously that they're keeping the weight down. So I think a good job there. I did find, even for my narrow foot, perhaps I had to pull in the laces just a little bit, that I was on, especially my right foot, my right big toe felt slightly cramped up a bit, not that it was rubbing or anything, but yeah, just be slightly cautious of that. And obviously it does sort of taper in a bit there, so again, if you've got wider feet, then maybe the option is to look at half a size up or wait for that wider version. But the generally feeling on foot that is nice and springy responsive, but I think also be aware of how far you could actually go in this shoe. And I think some runners prefer like slightly softer feeling shoes. Other runners prefer slightly firmer shoes, and perhaps that opinion changes depending on how far you go. I mean, maybe a bit like, say, the Liberate Nitro from Puma, which sort of ended up as being a shoe that sort of people started to sort of race in as a sort of budget option. I'm beginning to wonder whether they bring out shoes like this to either be a shoe that you use for casual sort of 5Ks several times a week, or if you use it for more like up-tempo runs. I think we have to look at these daily trainers in different categories of shoes. So this one is definitely on the old school, more like almost the tempo shoe. Yes, you could use it for daily training if you want to, but you've got to sort of like those really sort of minimalist feeling shoes and have no concerns about stability and that sort of thing. Because I think if you are someone that needs a bit of stability, I would steer clear of this one, because the fact it's got no arch support, it's got the glued in insole, it's got the soft feeling foam, then yeah, you may feel that this one's a bit of like hard work. And sometimes these sort of shoes, I think after a while, they don't feel quite as nice as they would when you set off on your run. So again, something to be aware of. But in terms of a shoe that's like cheap and cheerful, and yeah, you feel like, oh, this is nice to run in, so I think it's certainly done a good job here, Adidas, and I think it's a very competitive price. And it's interesting because I think the Speed 4, the Mach 6, the Rebel V4, they're all about this sort of weight category, but they're all offering slightly different things. So this is obviously the cheapest of those four, and the Mach 6 has obviously that lower drop, the Speed 4 has obviously the bit of the plate in there, and the Peba foam, and the Rebel V4, well, that's probably the widest shoe I've ever known, but once I actually synced it down, it wasn't too bad, but just sort of like feel that really wide platform. So you know, you've got shoes there for different sort of tastes in softness, and maybe the Speed 4's just got a bit more stability as well, in terms of the fact that it's a bit more structured to it, a bit more expensive as well. So in terms of the Adizero shoes that I've got to hand, that are the non-racing ones, well, obviously now the SL2 is at the bottom of the range. It's a sort of lightweight, cheap daily trainer offering that there could perhaps be a tempo shoe. And also you might think, well, okay, isn't that just the Boston 12? Well, the Boston 12 is a bit heavier, and I think it also fits wider, and it's also got a bit more structure to it with the rods and stuff, and sort of feels like a lot more to it on foot. So I think this shoe would be better for like longer runs and stuff, and it perhaps more mimics the feeling of the Adios Pro 3, although it's a lot heavier, so you also get that training effect as well. I just feel that this is a shoe that, in comparison with this one, it's not like a case of, oh, I must get one or the other. It's a case of like you could have both and have to serve different purposes. As I said, I think the Boston 12 would perhaps be the one that I'd want to look for if I was running a bit further, and this one might be the one that I just want to pick up if I just want to do a few miles, or just want to sort of have a bit of an up-tempo run, but just wanted to have something fun on my feet. I worry that if you took the SL12 for like your long sort of marathon training, 2.5, 3 hour run, you might feel that it's sort of like not really enough shoe for you at the end of the day. And also a bit of a curveball, we've got the Adios 8. This is actually the lightest of the three, and it's also the lowest to the ground. It's also quite similar in tech. It's got the Light Strike Pro at the front and the Light Strike normal regular one at the back. But I also feel this one feels a bit more low to the ground, and some people do use this as a daily trainer. I think it comes down to what you actually like to do. I mean, I think for me this was just a bit too sort of racy and low to the ground for a daily train. I did do a longish multi-terrain run in it last summer, and it was quite good for that, but as a sort of pure road running shoe, maybe not quite so good. But I did do a session in this one. Would I do a session in the SL2? Well, yeah, I did, like I did in this Speed 4. I think it's a shoe that if you've only got one to hand, you just use what you've got, haven't you? I think in sessions, you just need to get on with it. I mean, Andy, FOD runner, is quite good for just using whatever shoes he's got to hand for testing for sessions, and maybe using his best shoes for race day. I'm perhaps a bit more snobbish than that. Perhaps need a bit more help and tend to reach by vaporflies too often. But yeah, I mean, I think this one would do fine. I would struggle a bit in the Boston 12 for a session. I just think it's just a bit too heavy for me, but I think in more normal sizes, I've heard a lot of good reports on this. Perhaps it's a bit of a Marmite shoe as well. I've heard people sort of really love it, or people wondering why they do love it, and perhaps more on the not sure about it shoe. But I did manage to do about 75 miles in it, so it wasn't a complete disaster, and perhaps I'll give it another go. So a bit of curveball. I've got the Pegasus 41 here. I've just watched Sakuso Running's review of it. I think he's the biggest Pegasus fan on YouTube, and it was kind of good to hear that he actually liked the shoe. It was interesting that he found it quite different to the Peg 40, which seems to be not the opinion I'm hearing from other people. They're hearing it's the same old boring Pegasus. So I think also you've got to bear in mind that with this one, I feel like compared to the SL2, just sort of walking about it, I mean, I haven't managed to run in it yet because I've got a bit of a niggle. The Pegasus 41, it's a lot heavier, 75 grams heavier for me. So, you know, when you've got a shoe that's 75 grams heavier, you instantly think, oh, the SL2 is the one. But I think I would say it's horses for courses. And although you might think these are both daily trainers, I think they're very different types of daily trainers. I think that's a key point that you need to have, that the Pegasus 41 felt like a nice familiar shoe that I could get out and run some sort of like short, easy miles, pick up the pace, do a few strides at the end, but also it would be okay up to about 15 miles. Perhaps any longer, I think I would want more of a super shoe in inverted commas. And also it felt like it had a lot more structure to it, feeling that I was somewhat more supportive, although it did feel low to the ground, and then it did perhaps to the SL2, and not quite as soft. I think again it comes down to what you prefer. I think you've got to bear in mind with these shoes, you've got to really think about what you actually like in a shoe. Do you like a soft shoe? Do you like a more firmer shoe? Do you like a shoe that's lighter or heavier? Do you really care? Do you need a bit of support? Are you completely a person that can do away with no support at all? You know, how far do you run? How often do you run? How fast do you run? How fast is that compared to your race pace? There's so many different factors that you need to look at all these shoes and see what works best for you. So yeah, I was quite impressed with the SL2, especially for the price. I think, you know, you have to bear in mind that if this shoe cost £200, it wouldn't be as getting a favourable light if the shoe costs less than 100. But as a shoe that I put on and just go out and run a few miles, then yeah, it seems great. And the fact that it's nice and light, it's not a brick, it's etc., then very promising. And yeah, a good thumbs up here from Adidas. But yeah, just to be aware of a few sort of little fit niggles, and the fact that it is a budget shoe. It hasn't got all the absolute premium features of a more expensive shoe. It may not be a shoe that fits you in terms of the width. It doesn't have enough support, etc. So I hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe with that, and see you on the next one, which hopefully, if I can get back to running, will be the Pegasus 41 review. And bye from Daisy too.